Ethan's eyes fluttered open, his vision blurry and unfocused. Bright, white lights above him flickered, making it hard to tell if he was dreaming or awake. His head felt heavy, his body weak. For a moment, he didn't remember who he was or where he might be. All he knew was the strange sensation of something pressing against his chest, a warm, tingling feeling that was both soothing and terrifying. As his vision cleared, Ethan saw her. An alien figure hovered above him, her hands glowing with an unearthly light. She had smooth, pale blue skin that shimmered faintly in the artificial light. Her large, dark eyes were filled with a calm focus, and her delicate features seemed almost serene. Long, silver hair flowed down her back, giving her an ethereal appearance. For a moment, Ethan wondered if he was dead and seeing some kind of angel. But then he noticed the sharp tools on a tray nearby, glinting menacingly. The strange hums and beeping sounds from the machines surrounding him brought him crashing back to reality. This wasn't heaven. He was in an alien facility, and this creature, whatever she was doing something to him. "Stay still," the alien nurse said, her voice soft but firm. Her words were broken, as if she wasn't used to speaking his language. "Your body, fragile. Movement dangerous." Panic surged through Ethan. He tried to sit up, but his muscles wouldn't respond. His arms felt like lead, and his chest burned with pain. What are you doing to me?" he croaked, his voice hoarse and weak. The nurse's hands glowed brighter as she pressed them firmly against his chest. "Healing," she said simply. "Your heart. Damage. I fix." Ethan didn't feel reassured. Why? Why are you helping me? Where am I? His mind raced with questions, but his body refused to cooperate. All he could do was glare at her, hoping to mask his fear with anger. The nurse paused for a moment, her glowing hands still on his chest. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering how to answer. "You rescued. My ship found you. Alone. Injured. We help those who need." Her words made little sense to Ethan. Rescued? By aliens? He struggled to remember what had happened. Flashes of memory came to him. A space battle. His ship taking heavy fire. An explosion. He had been floating in the cold void of space, his suit's oxygen running low. He had been sure he was going to die. But now, here he was, alive, barely, and at the mercy of this strange alien nurse. Her hands began to glow even brighter, and a warm sensation spread through his chest. Despite his fear, Ethan couldn't deny that the pain was fading. "Let me go," he muttered, his voice shaking. "I don't need your help." The nurse's dark eyes narrowed slightly. "You need," she said firmly. "If not, you die." Ethan felt a surge of frustration. He hated feeling helpless, hated being at the mercy of someone, or something, he didn't trust. He tried to push her hands away, but his arms barely lifted an inch before falling back to his sides. His strength was gone. "Stop moving," she said sharply, her voice losing its calm tone. "Heart unstable. You make worse." Ethan froze, her words sinking in. Heart unstable. He looked down at his chest and saw faint, glowing lines running across his skin, as if the nurse's hands had left trails of light. What had she done to him? What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "Your body broken," she explained, her tone softening again. "I use Virana's healing. Your heart, your blood. It is fragile. I repair." Ethan's breathing quickened as she spoke. He didn't understand half of what she was saying, but the words broken and fragile stuck with him. Was he really so close to death? The nurse seemed to sense his fear. Her glowing hands moved more gently now, and she spoke in a soothing tone. "You safe. I fix. Trust me." Ethan wanted to argue, but the warmth spreading through his chest was oddly comforting. The pain was nearly gone, replaced by a strange, tingling sensation. For the first time, he noticed how tired he was. His eyelids grew heavy, and his breathing slowed. "Stay awake," the nurse said suddenly, her voice cutting through his haze. "Not sleep yet. Too early." Ethan forced his eyes open, staring at her. Who are you?" he asked weakly. The nurse hesitated for a moment before replying. "I am Lyra, Varanus healer. And you are my patient now." Her words hung in the air as Ethan's mind struggled to process them. He was alive, but at what cost? And who was this Lyra? This alien who had saved him? Questions swirled in his head, but exhaustion won out. For now, all he could do was lie there, helpless, as Lyra continued her strange, glowing work. The alien revelation. Ethan awoke to the gentle hum of the medical bay systems. The glow of alien technology painted the room in soft blues and whites, a strange contrast to the cold, metallic feel of his surroundings. He blinked a few times, adjusting to the light, his chest feeling heavier than before. His breath caught when he noticed Lyra sitting across the room, her pale blue skin shimmering faintly as she worked on a glowing device. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan broke the silence first, his voice hoarse but steady. "What's going on? Where am I?" Lyra stood and approached him cautiously, her long, silver hair flowing behind her like liquid light. She held a strange tablet in her hand, symbols flashing across its surface in a language Ethan couldn't read. "You are aboard Varanus' healing vessel," she said in her soft, melodic tone, her words carefully chosen. "We found you, drifting. Your ship destroyed." Ethan's memories were still hazy, but the mention of his ship brought flashes of chaos to his mind. Explosions, fire, the sound of alarms blaring as he shouted orders to his crew. Then, the cold silence of space as he floated, his oxygen depleting. "Destroyed," he murmured, his fists clenching. "My crew, what happened to them?" Lyra's gaze softened, and she hesitated before replying. "No others found," she said gently. "You, only survivor." Her words hit Ethan like a physical blow. His crew, his friends, were gone, and he was the only one left. He stared at the ceiling, his jaw tightening as he fought back the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He couldn't afford to break down now, not in front of her. Lyra seemed to sense his turmoil and stepped closer. "We tried to find more," she said, her voice soothing. "But debris, too dangerous. You were priority." Ethan turned his head to glare at her. "Why? Why save me? What do you want from me?" His voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. Lyra tilted her head, her dark, almond-shaped eyes meeting his. "Varanus do not want," she said simply. "We heal. It is our way." Her words were strange to Ethan. He had encountered countless alien species during his military career, and most of them had agendas, political, territorial, or resource-driven. But the Varanus, they claimed to heal without expecting anything in return. It was hard to believe. "Your kind just helps people, out of the goodness of your hearts?" he asked, his tone skeptical. Lyra nodded, her expression unchanging. "It is our purpose, our code." Ethan frowned, sitting up slightly despite the dull ache in his chest. "What did you do to me?" he asked, his hand instinctively touching the faintly glowing scars on his skin. "What is this glowing stuff?" Lyra hesitated before replying. "You were broken," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Your heart, your blood, damaged by nanotech weapon. Varanus healing, repaired." Ethan's heart sank. A nanotech weapon. He had heard of those before. Horrific devices designed to attack a person's body at the molecular level, eating away at their cells from the inside out. Most victims didn't survive. "So you're saying I was infected, and you fixed me?" he asked, his voice low. Lyra nodded. "Yes, but not fully. Nanotech, still inside. I stop it. For now." Ethan's eyes widened. What do you mean, for now? Lyra looked away, her hands clasping the glowing tablet. It is difficult. Your body resists. Healing not complete. Must do more. Ethan's stomach churned. The idea of more alien procedures made his skin crawl. Why didn't you just leave me out there? He muttered, his frustration spilling over. Why go through all this trouble for me? Lyra's gaze snapped back to him, and for the first time, her calm demeanor faltered. Because you were alive, she said, her voice carrying a surprising intensity. We do not leave alive ones to die. That is wrong. Her words silenced him. There was a sincerity in her voice that he couldn't ignore. As much as he wanted to doubt her, to accuse her of having some hidden agenda, he couldn't deny that she had saved his life. What happens now? He asked quietly. Lyra hesitated before answering. Now, you rest. Healing will continue, but must decide soon. Decide what? Ethan asked, his brows furrowing. Lyra's dark eyes seemed to grow sad. To complete healing, you must trust me. Procedure, dangerous. But if not, you die. Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. Trust an alien he barely knew with his life. The idea seemed insane. But what choice did he have? The glowing scars on his chest were a constant reminder that he was living on borrowed time. As Lyra stepped back, giving him space, Ethan lay there, his thoughts spinning. He didn't trust her, not yet. But for now, he had no choice but to play along. His life depended on it. A dangerous procedure. Ethan sat on the edge of the medical bed, his body still weak, but his mind sharper than it had been in days. The faint hum of the Varanus medical bay filled the air, a constant reminder of the advanced alien technology keeping him alive. His hand rested on the faintly glowing scars on his chest, the evidence of Lyra's work to save him. Despite her calm reassurances, Ethan couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. Across the room, Lyra stood by a tall console, her hands gliding over holographic controls that flickered with alien symbols. Her face, as always, was calm, but Ethan noticed the subtle tension in her movements. Something was bothering her, and that alone was enough to put him on edge. You've been quiet, Ethan said, his voice breaking the silence. That's not exactly comforting, considering you're the one keeping me alive. Lyra turned to face him, her large, dark eyes meeting his. I am thinking, she replied, her voice steady, but laced with a hint of hesitation. The next step, difficult. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Difficult how? Lyra walked over to him, carrying a small device that pulsed faintly with a blue light. She held it out, showing him the intricate patterns etched into its surface. Nanotech still in your body, she explained. It is spreading. Slowly. I stopped it for now, but it will grow again. Ethan's chest tightened. You said you stopped it. I thought I was safe. You are safe for now, Lyra replied, her tone soft. But not forever. To stop it fully, we must destroy it at its source. And let me guess, Ethan said, crossing his arms. That's the difficult part. Lyra nodded, placing the device on a tray beside him. The nanotech. It is inside your heart. Deep. To remove it, I must enter your body with Varanus tools. It is dangerous. Ethan frowned, his unease growing. Enter my body. What does that mean? Lyra hesitated, searching for the right words. Varanus healing uses integration. My energy connects to your cells. It is precise, but risky. If I make mistake, your heart may stop. Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. The idea of someone, an alien, no less, messing with his heart at a cellular level was horrifying. But the alternative wasn't much better. And if we don't do this? He asked, his voice low. Lyra's gaze dropped, and for the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of vulnerability in her expression. The nanotech will grow, she said quietly. It will reach your brain, your lungs. You will fade. Ethan took a deep breath, his hand unconsciously gripping the edge of the bed. So it's either die slowly or risk dying quickly. Great options, he muttered. Lyra stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. I will do my best. Varana's healing is advanced. I have done this before. Ethan smirked bitterly. And how many patients died during your advanced healing? Lyra hesitated, the silence stretching between them. Some, she admitted finally, but most live. Her honesty caught Ethan off guard. He expected her to sugarcoat the risks, to give him false assurances, but she didn't. There was something oddly comforting about that. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. If I agree to this, what do I need to do? Lie still, Lyra said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. And trust me. Ethan let out a dry laugh. Trust, huh? Not exactly my strong suit when it comes to aliens. Lyra tilted her head, studying him. You trusted me enough to let me save you before. Did I have a choice? Ethan shot back. You always have choice, Lyra replied softly. Even now. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Ethan said nothing. He hated feeling powerless, but he couldn't deny the truth. He needed her help. As much as he wanted to cling to his suspicion and anger, they wouldn't save his life. Finally, he nodded. Fine. Let's do it. But if this kills me, I'm haunting you. Lyra blinked, her expression puzzled. Haunting. Never mind. Ethan muttered. Just do your thing. Lyra's calm demeanor returned as she began preparing the equipment. Ethan watched as she arranged the glowing tools on the tray beside him, her movements precise and practiced. Despite his nerves, he couldn't help but notice the grace with which she worked. It was clear that whatever else she was, Lyra was dedicated to her craft. As she placed her glowing hands on his chest, Ethan felt the familiar warmth spreading through him. This time, though, it was different. The warmth grew stronger, almost overwhelming. As Lyra's energy began to flow into him, he gritted his teeth, his body tensing as the sensation deepened. Breathe, Lyra said gently, her voice cutting through the rising discomfort. You must stay calm. Ethan focused on her voice, grounding himself as the strange alien energy coursed through his veins. It was like nothing he had ever experienced, both painful and soothing, terrifying and awe-inspiring. Almost there, Lyra murmured, her eyes glowing faintly as she concentrated. Do not let go. Ethan clenched his fists, forcing himself to endure. Whatever was happening, he had to trust her, at least for now. His life depended on it. Fight or flee. The Varanus medical bay shuddered violently, and the faint hum of the ship's systems turned into a chaotic chorus of alarms. Ethan gripped the edges of the bed, his body tense as another tremor rocked the vessel. The sharp clanging of distant impacts echoed through the ship, making it clear they were under attack. Lyra stood near the console, her calm demeanor cracking for the first time. Her large, dark eyes darted between the holographic displays and Ethan, the faint glow of her skin dimming as worry etched itself onto her features. They have found us, she said quietly, though her voice carried an edge of urgency. Who's they? Ethan demanded, pushing himself to sit upright despite the dull ache in his chest. His muscles still felt weak, but adrenaline surged through him as the situation grew more dire. Lyra hesitated before answering. Raiders, hostile faction. They want our ship, our technology. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had encountered plenty of raiders in his military career, merciless scavengers who wouldn't hesitate to slaughter anyone in their path. He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on a metal cabinet near the corner. Do you have weapons on this ship? He asked. Lyra shook her head. We are healers. We do not carry weapons. Ethan let out a frustrated sigh. Great. So we're sitting ducks. Another explosion shook the ship, this one closer. The lights flickered, and a new alarm blared. A shrill, high-pitched sound that made Ethan's skin crawl. Lyra's hands flew over the console, her movements frantic as she spoke rapidly in her native language. The holographic displays shifted, showing a small fleet of ships surrounding the Varanus vessel. "They are boarding," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "They will take everything." "Not if we stop them," Ethan replied, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He ignored the sharp protests of his body as he forced himself to stand. His legs wobbled, but he steadied himself against the wall. Lyra turned to him, her expression a mix of shock and concern. "You are not strong enough. You must rest." "Rest?" Ethan snapped, glaring at her. "You just said they're boarding. If we don't do something, we're dead, or worse. I've dealt with raiders before. I know how they operate." Lyra hesitated, her gaze flickering between Ethan and the displays. "You cannot fight them. There are too many." "Then we outsmart them," Ethan said firmly. "But I need your help. You know this ship better than I do." Lyra seemed to consider his words, her lips pressing into a thin line. Finally, she nodded. "The ship's systems. I can use them to delay the raiders, but it will not stop them." "It'll buy us time," Ethan said, limping toward the console. "Can you isolate the sections they're boarding? Lock them in?" Lyra's eyes brightened slightly as she understood his plan. "Yes, I can seal the corridors, but only for a short time." "Do it," Ethan said. "And while you're at it, cut the lights in those sections. Make it harder for them to move." Lyra nodded, her fingers dancing across the holographic controls. A series of low thuds echoed through the ship as bulkhead doors slid shut, trapping the raiders in designated areas. The lights in those sections flickered out, plunging them into darkness. Ethan watched the displays, his mind racing. "Do you have anything we can use as a weapon? Tools, equipment, anything?" Lyra hesitated, then gestured toward a nearby storage unit. "Medical tools, some sharp, but not meant for fighting." "It's better than nothing," Ethan said, moving to the unit. He opened it to find an array of strange, glowing instruments, scalpels, syringes, and devices he couldn't identify. He grabbed a long blade-like tool that felt sturdy in his hand. "This'll have to do." Another explosion rattled the ship, and the alarms grew louder. Lyra glanced at the displays, her expression darkening. "They are cutting through the doors," she said. "They will reach us soon." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Then we set a trap. Can you vent the atmosphere in the boarding sections?" Lyra's eyes widened. "Yes, but it will not kill them. Their suits protect them." "It doesn't have to kill them," Ethan said. "It just needs to disorient them. Once they're off balance, we'll hit them hard." Lyra hesitated, clearly uneasy with the idea of taking aggressive action. "Varanus do not harm. It is against our way." Ethan turned to her, his expression serious. "Lyra, if we don't fight back, they'll kill us. Sometimes you have to make hard choices to survive." Her gaze softened, and after a moment, she nodded. "I will help." Together, they worked quickly. Lyra manipulated the ship's systems to vent the atmosphere in the raiders' sections, while Ethan prepared makeshift weapons from the medical tools. His military instincts kicked in, and he began formulating a strategy for ambushing the raiders once they reached the medical bay. As the alarms blared and the ship groaned under the strain of the attack, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm. He had been in tight spots before, but this time was different. He wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting for Lyra too. And somehow, he knew she would fight for him in return. The lights in the medical bay dimmed as Lyra activated the ship's defensive protocols. She turned to Ethan, her glowing hand steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We are ready." Ethan gripped the makeshift blade tightly, his muscles tense. "Let's make sure they regret ever boarding this ship." As the sound of the raiders' cutting tools grew louder, Ethan and Lyra stood side by side, prepared to face whatever came through the door. The inner conflict. The medical bay was eerily quiet after the chaos of their trap. Ethan sat slumped against the wall, the makeshift blade still gripped tightly in his hand, stained with the black, oily blood of the raiders. His chest heaved with labored breaths, and every muscle in his body screamed in protest. Across the room, Lyra knelt near the console, her glowing hands hovering over a deep gash on her arm. Her usually serene face was tight with pain, though she made no sound. They had survived. Barely. The raiders who weren't dead had retreated, their numbers reduced and their confidence shattered by the unexpected resistance. But the cost of their victory weighed heavily on both of them. Ethan glanced at Lyra, who was focused intently on healing her wound. "You okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Lyra nodded without looking at him. "It is minor," she replied, her tone distant. "I will heal." He didn't press her further, but he could see the strain in her movements. She was trying to stay strong, but the fight had taken a toll on her, just as it had on him. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the ship's systems, struggling to remain operational after the damage it had sustained. Finally, Lyra broke the silence. "You risked much," she said, her voice soft. "You are still weak. You should not have fought." Ethan let out a dry laugh, wincing as the motion sent a sharp pain through his chest. "Didn't really have a choice, did I? It was fight or die. And I'm not ready to die just yet." Lyra turned to face him, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, something Ethan couldn't quite place. "You fight so hard," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "Even when your body is broken. Why?" Ethan leaned his head back against the wall, staring up at the flickering lights above. "Because giving up isn't an option," he said simply. "If I'd learned anything in this universe, it's that you have to keep pushing, no matter how bad things get. The moment you stop fighting, you lose everything." Lyra seemed to consider his words, her gaze thoughtful. "Varanus, do not fight," she said after a moment. "We heal, protect life. But today," she trailed off, her voice trembling slightly. "Today, you fought." Ethan finished for her, his tone gentle. "And that's okay. Sometimes, protecting life means doing things you're not comfortable with." Lyra's hand stilled, and she looked down at the faint scar on her arm. "It feels wrong," she admitted, "to harm others, even if they are enemies." Ethan pushed himself to his feet with a groan, his legs unsteady beneath him. He walked over to her, his steps slow and deliberate, and knelt down beside her. "It's not easy," he said, his voice softer now. "It never is. But you did what you had to do. If you hadn't, we'd both be dead right now." Lyra met his gaze, her eyes searching his for something. Approval, reassurance, or maybe understanding. "You do not hate me for it?" she asked quietly. "Hate you?" Ethan repeated, surprised. "Lyra, you saved my life more times than I can count. You stood by me when most people wouldn't have. There's nothing to hate." Her expression softened, and for the first time since they'd met, Ethan saw a faint smile tug at the corners of her lips. It was small and fleeting, but it was there. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan sat back, letting out a long breath. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this mess. The raiders might have backed off, but they'll regroup. We need to figure out our next move." Lyra nodded, her focus shifting back to the console. "The ship is damaged," she said. "Engines weak. We cannot run far." "Then we don't run," Ethan said firmly. "We make a stand." Lyra looked at him, her brow furrowing. "You want to fight again?" "We don't have a choice," Ethan replied. "If we try to run, they'll catch us, and we'll be defenseless. But if we fortify our position, we might stand a chance." Lyra hesitated, her hands hovering over the controls. "I will help," she said finally. "But I am afraid." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. "Fear's normal," he said. "It means you care about what happens next. But you're not alone in this. We'll get through it together." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, the room felt a little less cold, a little less dangerous. Despite everything they had faced, despite the odds stacked against them, Ethan felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could survive this. As Lyra began working on the ship's systems, Ethan leaned back against the wall, his mind racing with possibilities. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let the Raiders win. Not while he still had breath in his body. And as he glanced at Lyra, her determination shining through her fear, he realized something else. He wasn't fighting just for himself anymore. He was fighting for her too. The final stand. The ship groaned under the strain of its damaged systems, and Ethan could feel the vibrations through the floor. It was a constant reminder of the fragile situation they were in. The Varanus vessel wasn't built for war, and every second it stayed in one piece was a small miracle. Lyra worked tirelessly at the console, her glowing hands flying over the holographic controls. Her usual calm demeanor had returned, though Ethan could see the occasional flicker of doubt in her eyes. She was doing everything she could to keep them alive, but even she had to know the odds weren't in their favor. "They are regrouping," Lyra said, her voice breaking the tense silence. "The Raiders' ships, moving closer. They will board again soon." Ethan tightened his grip on the makeshift blade in his hand. His body still ached from the earlier fight, but he ignored the pain. "How much time do we have?" "Not long," Lyra replied, her gaze fixed on the display. "Maybe 10 minutes." Ethan let out a frustrated sigh. 10 minutes to figure out how to stop a group of armed raiders with a scalpel and some fancy lights. Fantastic. Lyra glanced at him, her dark eyes filled with concern. "You are still injured. You should not fight again." Ethan shook his head. "If I don't fight, who will? You said it yourself. Your people don't believe in harming others. And I doubt the raiders are going to stop just because we ask nicely." Lyra hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "There is one thing," she said slowly, "but it is dangerous." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous how?" Lyra stepped away from the console, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "The ship's core," she explained. "It has energy. Powerful. If I overload it, the energy will release. It could disable the Raiders' ships." Ethan frowned. "Could? That doesn't sound very reassuring." "It is unpredictable," Lyra admitted. "The energy might destroy them. Or destroy us." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "So we either get boarded and die, or we blow ourselves up, and maybe take them with us. Great options." Lyra looked down, her expression conflicted. "I do not want to harm, but I do not want you to die." Her words caught Ethan off guard. He stared at her for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Finally, he let out a sigh. "Look, Lyra, if it comes down to it, you do what you have to do. But let's try to find another way first, okay?" She nodded, though the worry in her eyes didn't fade. As the Raiders' ships drew closer, Ethan and Lyra worked together to prepare the medical bay for what would likely be their final stand. Ethan rigged makeshift barricades using overturned equipment, while Lyra adjusted the ship's systems to create as many obstacles as possible for the invaders. The two of them moved with a quiet determination, their shared goal unspoken but understood: survival. "Ethan," Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence, "why do you keep fighting? Even now?" He paused, glancing at her. "Because I don't have a choice," he said simply. "I've lost too much already. I'm not about to let them take anything else." Lyra studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You are strong," she said softly. "Stronger than I thought." Ethan smirked. "Don't give me too much credit. I'm just too stubborn to quit." The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the ship, and both of them tensed. The raiders were cutting through the bulkhead doors again. This time, there would be no stopping them. "They are here," Lyra said, her voice trembling. Ethan gripped his blade tightly, positioning himself behind one of the barricades. "Stay behind me," he said firmly. "I'll hold them off as long as I can." Lyra hesitated, then stepped forward. "No," she said quietly. "I will not let you do this alone." He turned to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. There was no fear there anymore, only determination. She raised her hands, the faint glow of her energy intensifying. "I can help," she said. "I will protect you." Before Ethan could respond, the bulkhead door exploded inward, and the raiders poured into the room. They were heavily armed, their dark armor gleaming in the dim light. Ethan didn't hesitate. He surged forward, using the barricade for cover as he swung his makeshift blade at the nearest raider. The fight was brutal and chaotic, every second a desperate struggle for survival. Beside him, Lyra unleashed her energy in ways Ethan had never seen before. Her glowing hands sent arcs of light slicing through the air, disabling the raiders' weapons and knocking them off balance. She moved with a grace and precision that left Ethan in awe, her usually gentle demeanor replaced by a fierce determination. Despite their efforts, the raiders were relentless. Ethan could feel his strength waning, his injuries catching up to him. But every time he faltered, Lyra was there, her energy shielding him from harm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last raider fell. The room was silent except for the sound of Ethan's ragged breathing and the faint hum of Lyra's energy. Ethan dropped to his knees, his body trembling from exhaustion. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra knelt beside him, her glowing hands hovering over his injuries. "You are hurt," she said, her tone gentle. "Let me heal you." Ethan managed a weak smile. "You've already done enough, Lyra. I'm still breathing, aren't I?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and sadness. "You are more than just breathing," she said softly. "You are alive, and that is all that matters." As the ship's alarms quieted and the flickering lights stabilized, Ethan realized that for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't in years: hope. A new beginning. The ship drifted in silence, a lone speck in the endless void of space. The once gleaming Varanus vessel was now battered and scarred, its hull marred with burn marks and jagged tears. Inside the medical bay, Ethan lay propped up against a wall, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Lyra knelt beside him, her glowing hands carefully tending to the wounds he had stubbornly ignored during the fight. "You are reckless," she said softly, her tone carrying a mix of scolding and relief. "You push your body too far." Ethan chuckled weakly, though the motion made him wince. "Reckless is better than dead," he replied. "Besides, you were the real hero back there. I didn't know you had that kind of fight in you." Lyra paused, her hands still glowing as they hovered over a deep gash on his arm. "I did not know, either," she admitted. "It was strange. I felt something inside me, like I had to protect you." Ethan tilted his head to look at her, his expression softening. "You did more than protect me, Lyra. You saved me again." Her eyes met his for a brief moment before she looked away, her cheeks darkening with a faint blush. "It was necessary," she said quietly. "I could not let you die." The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. For the first time since Ethan had woken up on her ship, there was no immediate danger, no alarms blaring or raiders breaking down the doors. It felt almost surreal. "So," Ethan said after a moment, breaking the quiet, "what's the plan now? Your ship's barely holding together, and I don't think either of us is in shape for another fight." Lyra stood and moved to the console, her hands gliding over the holographic controls. "The engines are damaged," she said. We cannot jump to safe space, but I have located a planet. It is habitable. We can land there. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A planet. Out here. What's it doing in the middle of nowhere? Lyra hesitated. It is uncharted, likely forgotten by others, but it will give us time to repair, to heal. Ethan nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. An uncharted planet could mean safety or danger. Still, it was their best option. All right, he said. Let's do it. As Lyra guided the ship toward the planet, Ethan forced himself to his feet, leaning on a nearby console for support. The pain in his chest had dulled, thanks to her healing, but he still felt like he'd been run over by a tank. You should rest, Lyra said, glancing at him. Your body is fragile. Ethan smirked. Fragile, huh? You've been calling me that since we met. I'm starting to think it's your favorite word. Her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. It is accurate, she said. Humans are strange, strong, but so easy to break. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Ethan said, rolling his eyes. Remind me to return the favor next time you're pinned down by raiders. Lyra's smile widened just a little, and for a brief moment, the tension between them eased. Despite their differences, species, culture, even their philosophies on life, they had become an unlikely team. And for the first time, Ethan felt like he wasn't alone in the fight. The planetfall. When the ship finally broke through the planet's atmosphere, Ethan stood by Lyra's side, watching the view through the main screen. The surface below was a patchwork of dense forests, rolling hills, and shimmering rivers. It was beautiful, untouched by war or industry, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Lyra adjusted the controls, her movements precise despite the ship's damaged state. We will land near water, she said. It is necessary for repairs. Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Looks peaceful, he said. Let's hope it stays that way. The landing was rough, the ship groaning in protest as it settled on a wide grassy plain near a sparkling blue lake. As the engines powered down, silence enveloped them once again, broken only by the faint chirping of alien creatures outside. Ethan and Lyra stepped out of the ship together, the fresh air filling their lungs. Ethan took a deep breath, savoring the moment. After everything they had been through, it felt like a small victory. This place is beautiful, Lyra said, her voice soft as she looked around. Her silver hair shimmered in the sunlight, and for a moment, Ethan couldn't help but stare. Yeah, he said finally. It's not bad. They spent the next few hours assessing the damage to the ship and gathering resources from the surrounding area. Lyra's knowledge of the planet's flora and fauna proved invaluable, and Ethan found himself relying on her expertise more than he expected. As the sun set, casting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the two of them sat by the lake, their makeshift campfire crackling softly. Ethan leaned back, gazing at the stars overhead. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. Do you think we'll make it? He asked, breaking the silence. Lyra looked at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. We are alive, she said. That is enough. Ethan chuckled. You've got a way with words, you know that. She tilted her head, her expression curious. Is that good? It's good, he said, smiling. Real good. As the fire crackled between them, Ethan realized that this wasn't just the end of a fight. It was the beginning of something new. A new chance at survival. A new bond. And maybe, just maybe, a new future.